Basically, to explain Western justice in the most layman's terms possible, is we are what NRA is to guns, we are to the Western lifestyles.
I mean, you're now involved in the wolf issue in the West, and it's actually not going to be the West's problem alone here pretty soon. It's actually going to be the whole United States' problem. But from your perspective, why is the wolf a dangerous thing? Why do you think it's dangerous to the Western lifestyle?
The ranches that called me were losing so much. And then when I got involved with the ranches up in Washington State, I didn't realize how bad they had it up there. I mean, they are totally saturated Northeast Washington with wolves.
Right around the panhandle of Idaho and Washington, right? Or are they coming down into the rest of Washington too?
Oh, they're drifting all the way down through into Oregon from up there too. And now consequently down into Nevada, Southeast Oregon, Nevada, California, they're drifting. That one went all the way from Idaho all the way down, and then went into the Siskiyous and down and all the way into the Santa Monicas before it got killed somehow, hit by a car. Something happened to it, but I'm not sure. I don't remember what exactly happened to it, but that was a lone male that was collared, and that's the only reason they knew it went that far. And that one did. But, I didn't realize the amount of depredation that was happening on some of these ranches. And the Diamond M up there in Colville, outside of Colville, which is their ranch is on the border of Canada and the United States. And it's probably, as you see in the documentary, it's some of the prettiest country there is. I mean, it is beautiful up there. And you come off a mountain and a dirt road down into a valley, and there's this big river running right through their ranch, and just this, in mountains all the way around. It's just beautiful. And they're getting eaten alive. And historically, where they'd have a 5% death loss at the most in a year. And these are, I got to go back and say, these are permits that they begged them from the 40s to start going up on and using. And these things, they have to drive cattle 3 days up a mountain to get to those mountain meadows that they wanted them to graze off. And then what happened.
So just a question. So you're saying the Forest Service wanted them to graze these, right?
Yeah. In the 40s, the government came to them and said, hey, we want somebody to go up there. The McIrvins, the Diamond M up there, were the first people to actually haul from their home place to haul cattle to an allotment and turn their cattle out, which happens all the time now. But back then, they were using the old, 1940s World War II 6x6s, and they'd put 14 head in a 6x6 with stake beds, stake slats on it, and they'd haul them to, 14 at a time. None of this 85 or whatever on a cattle truck now that we have on a pot, So it's an amazing thought to think that they were doing that back then, and drive 30 miles with a load of cattle and come back and get another load and stick them all out there and have to do all that logistics, bringing them back and all that. But they push them cattle to the top of the mountain, and as the weather, they eat things off. They just naturally migrate down the mountain. And they end up being able to gather them off the bottoms, by fall. And they had a historic death loss of 5% at the most. And then they had a historic open rate of, 5 to 7% at the most. And then they're looking at a 10 to 15% death loss up there. And that's not even the worst part. The worst part is the open rate on their cattle. They're getting harassed so much, they're either sloughing the calves or they're not breeding back at all. And so they're coming in with a 20 to 35% open rate, depending on who it is up there and where the herd was at and where the wolves were at the time.
So let's stop right here and talk about this a little bit, because a lot of people may not understand. He's using rancher terminology, but open rate means that it's the rate of cows that don't have a calf with them, so they're not pregnant. So they either don't breed because they're getting harassed and the stress level is high, so they don't actually conceive, or they slough the calf because they're running around or nervous or anything. And so you're talking about 15 to 20%. Let's try to put that in some kind of perspective for somebody.
The open rate is 20 to 35%.
Right. So you said the death loss on the calves was 15
to 15. Yeah.
And then the open rate is 20. So that means you're losing, 35 to 40% of your calves. Basically, you're losing 35 to 40% of your income. So if you put this in the perspective of somebody's business, right? How do you, it's like usually somebody with a physical product, they don't have anywhere near that loss anyway, because, you have it on your shelf. It's a physical product. If somebody buys it, you ship it to them. But with cattle, you always have this risk. Like all of your money is sitting in a live animal. So if that live animal loses weight, or if it doesn't have a calf, because the only way a cow-calf operation makes money is to sell the calves on the market, and they end up as beef on your plate. So if you're losing 40%, even if you just minimize that to 30%, if you're losing 30%, where you're figuring historically you were losing 5 to 8%, let's say,
right.
That is such a catastrophic difference in income. You know what I mean? And so let's talk about this for a minute. Now, I know you don't deal with like the cattle markets, but people need to understand when they look at a rancher, typically they see somebody who's got this beautiful ranch that you're talking about. They're like, well, they have it all. There's nothing they could need, and they don't relate it to how it affects them. So we're talking about 40% less. This is if they don't shut down the Forest Service leases and the stuff that they're trying to do all over the United States. But just from the wolf itself, you have a loss on one particular ranch of 30 to 40%. That is 30 to 40% of beef that doesn't end up in the system in the United States that's grown here, right? So that directly affects the price that you pay in the store, and it directly affects how much beef we have to import, which is handing over control to somebody else, some other country, which would be Brazil or China in this case, right? So this all affects not only the rancher, but every single person downstream. So,
well, and yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, the big thing is somebody like Diamond M is probably the biggest private producer of cattle in Washington State, if not the Northwest, one of the biggest private producers. And they're losing $500,000 a year right now in production. The only reason they're able to survive is that they have timber and mining on their ranches too. They've been around long enough. They have enough deeded ground to be able to have timber and mining and have other sources of income. But they're still, they're not giving up. They're going to fight back. The sixth generation of that ranch, Nathan Knapp, went to DC with me and to that MOU signing on the grazing. The grazing, it was 3 weeks ago today that we sat across table from Secretary Burgum and Secretary Rollins on that MOU signing. And one of the things that we brought up was the wolves. Who in the hell is going to go out on these Forest Service allotments? They want to get people out on these things, but who's going to go out there when you're going to lose 30 to 40% of your calf crop or your production? That would break most people. And it has broke a lot of them. It's already broke a lot of them.
We've lost half of our cattle producers, the cattle ranchers and farmers in the United States since 1980.
Yeah.
So we're losing.
Idaho's lost a ton.
Yeah.
Idaho lost a ton of them 30 years ago. And my narrator, my John Walsh of all my documentaries, is from Mud Lake originally, and they used to run their family ranch used to run on the Forest Service, and they had to quit running and just bring their cattle down to the meadows, the irrigated meadows that were private ground they could protect them on 30 years ago in Idaho. And he talks about the same thing sitting in meetings 30 years ago, and he says it's like deja vu. sitting in this cattlemen's meeting in Eastern Washington, because he said 30 years ago, we were doing the same thing. We were saying the same things, doing the same things. And fifth, sixth generation ranches got run out of business, because of the wolves 30 years ago.
Yeah, well, people don't understand how long they've been here. They've been here a long time, and they're coming in from Canada and everything. So we're talking about a lot of what we're talking about is like when they're moving them down to private ground. A lot of people cheer for this because they're moving them off of public ground. So you're talking about this thing that you signed with Secretary Bergman, Secretary Bergman, about the grazing. So let's talk about that for a little bit, because people don't understand the benefit that there is to have cattle on the public ground. They don't think that they're benefiting from that, even from the hunting side. So,
well, sheep and cattle
that you signed, first of all.
Yeah, sheep and cattle have had beneficial use of public lands forever in this country since we started it. But the problem, when they started taking everything off, they've not only ruined our lamb industry, but they also are ruining the cattle industry with the amount of people that are getting kicked off. And probably one of the things you probably see it. One of the biggest comments we get is that, public lands grazers only represent 2% of the cattle industry. I don't know where that number came from, but assuming that that's the case, that's when you go down the line of how much the average person consumes in beef, and then you lay out what 2% of the cattle production is in the United States, that is 9.6 million people get their beef from public lands grazers right now. Not like prior when there was a lot more out there. Now I got a map. I have a map that a friend of mine, Ramona Morrison, who is a Hage, so the Sagebrush Wars, the big Wayne Hage Sr. and Wayne Hage Jr., situation down there in Tonopah, Nevada. She's one of the experts that'll go into a court case adjudicating water and land title and all of that stuff. She did the title on the Reagan Ranch in California because she's so good. And the chain of title on all the way back to the Spanish land grant, all of that stuff. So she did a map for us on let's just take Nevada. All of those mountains in Nevada, even though they look barren, mostly barren, a lot of them, they used to run sheep over them and cattle over them. And they both kind of complement and eat different things. Well, those allotments have almost all been taken away from the ranchers since the 90s. And because of that, if you go decade over decade, starting even just in the 60s, of fire maps, of fires that happened in a decade in Nevada, you see like the 60s, there's dots all over, dots, and mostly lightning strikes, but nothing major. And as it progresses, where they've taken people off those grazing lands, the low-level fuels are not grazed off. And these fires now, almost the whole map is covered with fire in the last decade. I mean, and these fires swell up to 500,000 acre fires, and they can't get them out, and they let it burn because it's going to burn the cheatgrass. Well, we wouldn't have the cheatgrass if they'd kept grazing sheep and cattle all over the place. It wouldn't be the way it is. But my point is, if grazing was so bad, what are the fires? What are the fires to the for one, they ruin the ground for a year or two. The wild horse, we've got all kinds of great government programs that are ruining the ground versus the cattle and sheep and the ranchers who took care of it, because if they didn't take care of it, it wasn't going to produce for them the next year. They couldn't grow and produce anything the next year. So the ranchers have always been the best stewards of the land. And That's what we've been beat up so bad. The ranching community's been beat up so bad for so long. And with the green movement and all that stuff. I mean, I've seen, and I don't like science anymore, Trinity. I don't give a shit if it's a peer-reviewed study by everybody. I've seen things get put out because it's a money, somebody's getting paid to put it out. And there was one article that came out several years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, that said, I mean, should have set every rancher's hair on fire. And basically, just with the headline, it said, public lands grazing in the West exacerbates climate change. And it was on the cow farts, it was on all that stuff. So it was just, to me, some of the things that, and I could knock, I'm a high school educated Marine, and I could knock a hole in that whole peer-reviewed study that he did. I mean, it's just asinine.
Well, so one of the problems that I think science can really help us if it was actually done in a way that was
sure
on the ground with reality in mind instead of peer-reviewed. See, peer-reviewed people misunderstand that. That means that a bunch of people that are on the same level of education as you agreed with whatever you wrote down. That is consensus science. That's not actually taking your findings and going, okay, these all make sense. So, and when we're talking about climate change as a part of this system, it's very interesting when you start looking into why the elk aren't here, or why the elk are dropping, and they write this thing in there. Well, it's because of climate change and loss of habitat. Right. Well, to me, that is an excuse to not actually do any science, because what you're saying is climate change is the problem instead of the overgrown timber that takes out that makes it so nothing can graze there. The wildlife doesn't have anything to actually eat anymore. You've taken out the cattle, which actually take off the rough grass so that the wildlife, can actually eat something they want to eat, and then wonder why all the elk are down on the private ranch. Where there's way less predators, where there's way better feed, and there's actually feed for them to eat. And then you say habitat loss, and I think sometimes people register habitat loss as directly associated with somebody's covered it with concrete, right? But that is not what they're talking about. They're talking about the fact that since we haven't logged anything and we're pulling off the grazing, we end up with forests that are not conducive for wildlife anymore. So you have old growth.
Anything.
Yeah. So you have these old growth. That is what they're talking about, the habitat loss. It's very telling when you see something like this. I was just looking up the population of moose in Idaho. And one of the things that they put in their documentation for the drop in moose population is that we have their heat stress is a consideration due to climate change. Now, when you look at that, Idaho is north, right? If you go down to Colorado, in the same time period, their moose population went from 300 and something to almost 3,000. Now they're 1,000 miles south of what they're talking about. Heat stress is causing the moose to have a problem in the north. So you have to read into it. What it takes is actually common sense, looking at this at the real issues, the real things on the ground, the real people on the ground, what you can actually see with your eyes. And you're doing the same thing I am. We're actually looking at what's written as when you throw out climate change and habitat loss, everybody goes, oh my goodness, it has to be. Their mind directly goes to what they've fed us for years and years as fear-mongering that caused that. Instead of looking at the real causes, which are we've locked our industries out of the forest. So we can't create habitat. We're not going to let fire do it because we suppress fire. Fires start all over the place and they burn so hot, they burn to the minerals, right? But we suppress them because there is roads, there's power poles, there's fences, there's towns in the way. So fire can't do what it used to do 200 years ago, where it would just run through somewhere, every 15 years and clean everything up.
It would clean those low-level fuels. I had a friend of mine back in 2020, there was a lot of fires getting set. Now, they tried to claim they were climate change. All those fires here in Oregon, almost every one of them was an arson. And I know that from the friends of mine at the state police that were told by the governor they couldn't put anything out that said that. You know, the Governor Kate Brown said, no, you cannot say anything about this. And these are caused by climate change. So there were so many fires out here, and then a buddy of mine in Utah, you might, I don't know if you know Carson Jorgensen, you know who he is? You ever seen him?
I don't.
Anyway, Carson called me and he goes, I was out where there was 10 fires set. He's a sheep guy and big sheep herder and sheep grower, whatever you want to call him, in Utah. He called me and said there was 10 fires lit in this one canyon, all the way up the canyon. And he said 9 of them burned out within maybe a quarter acre, he said, or less. Because, and then the 10th one at the top burned up 5 or 10,000 acres before they got it out. And it was all arson. So the only difference, he said, and the only reason he knew this was because he had just pulled his sheep off 3 days before off where they started the 9 fires that didn't go anywhere. He just pulled his sheep off. So they tried to light all that. It burned out on its own. And then you get up on where there was no sheep, up towards the top of the mountain or wherever, top of this draw, and it burned up 5 or 10,000 acres on its own, you know, because they couldn't, there was so much low level fuel. Well, you see that all over. I mean, it is so easy to go common sense wise. Look at Cal Poly several years ago when they were having those big fires in down there in Central California. Cal Poly had a fence line where they had grazed cattle, and even one of their professors came out and said, look, we grazed this side of the fence and the fence was untouched, and the big fire on the other side of the fence that just tore up everything. But even the trees were untouched on the Cal Poly side. There was burn marks on the ground where there might have been a little bit of fuel, but it would burn and burn out. But it was basically clean, and it would have been just as bad as on the other side of the fence if it hadn't been grazed off. It's a low level. And that's where it was funny, because in the first Trump administration, we made this point very clear to him, but he kept talking about leaves on the ground. And I kept calling my friends that were close to him, people that I knew that were close to him. I go, tell him not to talk about leaves on the ground. It's not the leaves. They're not going to go rake leaves out in the forest.
No.
It's the grass. It's the low level fuels are the grass and all
the grass and the little bushes and the, and when you go down to California, a lot of what you're talking about is low level fuel. So logging is a massive tool for, keeping down, creating fire breaks and things like that. But there is a lot of areas that have grass and brush that is worthless to a logger. You're never going, no logger would ever touch it unless you have to pay them to do it, because they're not going to go in there. There's nothing that you can actually sell. And when you have all that grass and brush near the ground, it doesn't take a whole lot to do this experiment. Just go onto a field that's been, grazed, and then a field that hasn't been grazed and for years and has all that heavy grass. Just light a fire in both of those. Don't do that on somewhere you're not supposed to. I'm not saying that, but it wouldn't take much to do that experiment and see what the difference is. It is incredibly different. So what you're talking about is one of the major benefits of having cattle. Not only do we actually create food for the nation, so we don't have to get it from some other country. That to me is a massive thing, but also you're lowering the fire risk on forest.
And using something that has no other beneficial use but to graze cattle. I mean, the deer don't go out there and eat the grass that the cattle do. I mean, the sheep, there's not enough wild sheep or that would even stay in those meadows and actually clean it up. The deer are very picky about what they eat. They don't eat most of the stuff that the cattle do. So there's nothing else that forages that type of forage plant and cleans it up. And going back to Oregon, I was at an event in 2020 in Jackson Hole, and the Secretary of Ag was there. And I called him out because I do believe from all my dealings that, and I told him this at that event, that the Forest Service is widely considered in the West the most corrupt organization in the federal government. I mean, that's my opinion. From all the people I've dealt with. But what I showed him was, because his senior advisor, the guy that did the transition in the first Trump administration for the USDA, was a good friend of mine. So he stayed with Sonny the whole time. And one of the things that he told me about was when Sonny Perdue got in there, he took every department and he had to make a video of what, he had his staff make a video of exactly how he wanted things to go. So he's from Georgia. All those forests down there in Georgia have no low-level fuels. They're beautiful, pristine. They look more like an orchard than a forest, a cleaned up orchard. And so he showed this video to all of his Forest Service people, and he said, this is what I want our national forest to look like. And they're like, oh, shit. So when we're at this event in 2020, so three and a half years into him being there, I show him a video of on a logging road on top of a mountain in Oregon, Paisley, Oregon. On the right side, pristine, just like he wanted. Green Diamond, big lumber company, big timber company on the West Coast. Green Diamond owns it. The ground, I mean, they might leave a couple logs for chipmunks out there laying on the ground, old cedar logs or something like that. But you could walk through everywhere, and it was really pretty, and it would have been a nice walk to go through there. All the animals can get through it. And then I panned over with my cell phone. I panned over to the other side of the road. I said, this is your Forest Service ground. And you could not graze sheep out there. There was so much deadfall. And It was the bark beetle and all that stuff that nobody was taking care of it. So there was all of these, I mean, it looks like, I swear to you, it looks like pixie sticks of white dead pine logs everywhere. And you could not graze, you damn sure couldn't get through it on a horse. And you couldn't, there's no way you could graze anything up there and get away with it. Well, I showed him that and he was like, are you kidding me? And I go, yeah, I said, no, I'm not kidding you. That's exactly what 3/4 of your national forests in Oregon look like. And you're going to tell me
all across the West, everywhere, the public land. That's and what people don't understand, because a lot of people are focused all on the wildlife, is the wildlife can't use it either. I mean, they'll go in there to bed down, but there's nothing to eat there. You can't get through it with anything. They can't eat anything there. It becomes worthless to the entire ecosystem when you have that when you have the old growth and then the deadfall in between it's not even usable. So you're actually limiting the amount of ground that you can have. Every time you limit the ability of humans to actively manage the forest through logging and grazing, you lose wildlife habitat every time.
Right. Yeah.
So there's this ideology that if you remove humans, somehow the whole thing will go back to this pristine, beautiful balance that's magical in some way. And that's where the wolf comes in. They sell the wolf as the ultimate manager.
Right.
Which is why it's there. They want the wolf there to replace the human manager, but it doesn't. What it does is let me just say this. There was a kind of balance on nature, 200 years ago, but it's not the kind of balance that you're thinking of. The kind of balance that people have in their mind is this perfect, even balance where everything just balances. No, It was a swing between disaster and disaster. For one thing, you had massive fire upon massive fire because that's part of what managed the land. Then you had 30 to 60 million buffalo that trampled everything. That caused the disturbance that cattle now can cause to create a healthy ecosystem. And then because you had so many game animals, the buffalo and everything, you had a system where the wolves would have a boom and bust cycle, not just the wolves, but all predators, where they would kill almost everything out of a certain area until they were hard to find. Then the wolves and all the other predators would starve to death or move until they would start to populate back into an area that's a boom and bust cycle. So
Sure.
we, in our system here, with everybody in the valleys, we have civilization now in the valleys. We cannot apply that system to the systems that we have today, which are in the mountains, which are smaller systems. They're segmented. They're not the whole thing. You can't have what we did. So applying the no human rule to what we have is just not using any kind of it's not using, I hate to say common sense, but it's just not using common sense. Unless you're going to remove the humans, which I would say I understand some people are actually for that. Well, that means that you better remove yourself, and we would have which we could have a massive crisis, food crisis, everything crisis, because if you hand over control of your food supply, we've seen with the Strait of Hormuz how that works. When there's something that you absolutely need and some other country has power over that. I mean, you look at what's happening to Europe and other countries that are completely reliant on oil through the Strait of Hormuz. That's what you're moving towards. So when it all has consequences, it is not a benefit to the wildlife to destroy to let everything go and remove humans on our forests. And it actually has consequences, like catastrophic consequences to your specific life, everybody's life in America. So this is all tied together, but that's why the wolf is there. And it's the reason it's having such an impact is because it's moving. You don't have any food on the forest for the wildlife. So it's moving the wildlife down onto the rancher, who's already taking a hit of, in some cases 30 to 40% from the wolf directly. Plus he's got to feed a whole bunch more wildlife on his property because they want to be there, not in the forest where you're just making it a wasteland. Right. And dangerous because you just keep adding wolves to it, and mountain lions and bears and everything else. So it is a totally flawed system that leads only to one place, and that is disaster for every human in America. If we're talking about America here, this is actually a worldwide ideology that is being sold to us. But it's so when we're talking to Dave here, Dave is you're dealing with some things to try to delist the wolf, because one of the major problems I see is the expense of the wolf to the American public.
Yeah.
People don't realize how much it's costing them in actual dollars from litigation and the loss of livestock and the management. I mean, just in Montana alone, it costs us $1,700 a wolf roughly every year just to manage them, and they don't bring in revenue like game animals do. Game animals,
don't forget about all of that the trickle down effect from the hunters. Nobody there are. And I didn't realize when I first got into the wolf situation that Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan have had it the worst for the longest. And I have heard over and over how many people in upstate Michigan, upstate Wisconsin, or Minnesota, Wisconsin,
yeah,
they have cabins on the lakes. They have hunting cabins up in the woods. They don't even go to anymore. They haven't been to them in 10 years because there's no deer to go shoot. And that used to be the big family outing or a way for them to make money, and there's none of that anymore because the wolves and the bears and the cats are so thick that there are mainly wolves and bears out there. But,
well, and just to put this in perspective, the entire state of Montana is trying to manage their wolf population down to 450. We're at 1,200. And Minnesota has over 2,900 wolves and cannot hunt them because they're protected under the Endangered Species Act. Isn't that right? They're on the list over there?
Yep.
And so they have no way to even limit it.
You know what's so amazing about this Endangered Species Act crap is that Washington State, up there where we did this documentary on Diamond Dam in Colville, is east of 395. 395 is the cutoff in Oregon and Washington going down. So east of 395, you could, if there's they're delisted east of 395. So if they're harassing your cattle, you're supposed to be able to go shoot them. Well, if you catch them in the act. But up in Washington State, the state ODF or WDFW has made it so that in the rules, they can't manage them without the state. They've kept them on the list, even over there where they're saturated. And they're saying it's because over here in the northeast corner, you guys may be saturated, but there's not enough over here in the Yakima range that, and until we get enough of them over there, we're not going to downgrade the listing on the wolves where you're at when you have 15 times what you're supposed to have for full recovery in your area. I mean, it's sickening what's going on up there.
Yeah, that's the thing is when you can't. So it's costing us that much in Montana where we can manage them somewhat,
right?
A limited management, but in all these other states, other than Idaho and Wyoming and Montana, there is no management whatsoever. So the cost is exponentially more because you're having to pay out through the agencies to do studies and collar wolves and capture them and track them, and they're taking out your food. They're putting pressure on the rancher. The financial hit that's to the country for just wolves is astronomical when you start looking into it. They say, tourism will pay for it. But tourism, all the numbers they use for tourism, the tourism for wolves happens in one place, and that's Yellowstone Park, around there, and that's it.
Where else are you going to go find them?
Huh?
Yeah. Where else are they going to charge people for tourism to go? I'm headed down to California, and I guarantee I'm going to see more wolves than I've seen even up in Washington because of the timber up there. Where it's at, you see them on the game cams. You don't see them unless they're depredating a cow or in a bottom kind of a deal on a ranch. But I got a funny story to tell you about Washington, though. There was a dairy right on the edge of the town of Colville. And this lady, she's an interesting gal, a little wild, being nice. She's a little wild and rambunctious, but she calls the sheriff because she shot a 140-pound male in her milking parlor, was in the milking parlor.
So
shot
just
and they don't
milking parlor is like a barn where you run your cows in the barn to milk them. That's called a milking parlor. Go ahead.
Yeah. So in the milking parlor, she shoots this wolf, calls the sheriff because nobody trusts the game department or the state. So she calls the sheriff. Sheriff goes over there, and she's right on the edge of town. I mean, right there. And she's telling him, and he's thinking she's being a little hyperbolic because she can be that way, I guess. But she's going, there's wolves everywhere out here. She's telling him there's wolves running around this place all the time. And he's going, oh, yeah, I don't know about that. He walks out of the milking parlor to go to his car, looks out in the pasture where her dairy cows are. And there was 3 wolves trotting the fence line out there after they shot the big male. Well, he's like, well, I guess she was right. She wasn't lying. She was, or she wasn't being hyperbolic. There are wolves all over here. So, they can't do anything about it legally.
Right.
So
Yeah,
even the
just have to
predator
take the hit.
control guy, the predator control guy, I mean, he's got an MOU to, be able to go kill mountain lions, but he can't kill the wolves.
Right.
He can't unless he gets specifically assigned to go get one, which they don't generally do. The sheriff department's third generation trapper that has been doing this stuff for his whole life can't go kill him. He kills 100 cats a year, and the only ones he gets that he goes and does that with are the problem ones that are in town or killing somebody's dog or killing somebody's sheep or they're in town. So he gets calls all through the night. I mean, 100 a year. That's
that
one every 3 days.
Problems. That's what people don't understand about predators. There's a predator obsession right now, and it's designed, I think, to replace the humans, like I said.
Right.
But selling it to the public isn't that hard because people see deer all the time and they don't see the predators. So they're thinking we need to have more, we can always use more predators. But they have to understand if you have, 2 wolves, they're going to kill 20 elk-sized game a year. That is not, you can't have anywhere near the same amount of predators than you can game animals. You have to have enormous amounts more game animals than you do predators. And predators are hard to find anyway. They're reclusive.
The interesting part of what comes out, there's a long-haired hippie-looking hotel owner, and his dad was very eccentric and a good guy, but they were hunters all the way. And that was up in Colville. And we sat him down, and he made a lot of sense out of the fact that it's not just the economy there in Colville. So this is a 300-unit hotel that they built up over the years. His grandfather built this business from scratch and did all this beautiful hotel. And if you watch the documentary, it's in the lobby. There's game fish and mounts all over the place in there. That place used to be full during the late buck season. So, and during regular hunting season, because that area was the whitetail capital of the Northwest, was that area. And so they used to fill up 300 units, and then they would put cots in the conference rooms for other guys, the overflow guys, because there was that many people that would come to that town. Now you think about the economic impact of that versus I was there filming during late buck season. So late buck season in Washington, if you didn't get a buck in any unit you had a tag for, you could go over there to Colville and go a late buck hunt, for the whitetail over there. Well, that was a huge, huge deal. And now, with the way he's taught, he was talking about, he goes, think about the people that aren't going hunting, the amount of economic impact, not just for Colville itself and all the businesses in Colville that benefited from that, but all the way across the state where people are traveling here to go do this, all the sales of gear, all of the different stuff. And when I was there in late buck season filming, there was like 5 cars in the parking lot of this 300-unit hotel. No shit. I mean, that's what was there. Yep. And it's like, what a sad commentary, because the whitetail, they figure are down 85% because of the wolves.
Wow. And see, this is the kind of stuff. This is the kind of stuff that we have to discuss, because where that money comes from, that money used to pay taxes for that county. Every time a business makes money in a county, it goes into and pays for services that you have. It pays for everything that we have. Now, if you remove that, you have to pay the agency then to manage the game animals the same amount of money. They still make the same amount of money. In fact, they're spending more now because they have to manage the wolf on top of it. And all of the studies that the court systems have to pay for. And all of this stuff has to come out of your tax dollars. So when your tax dollars are spent like this, you have to pay for it somehow. Somebody's paying for it, and that ends up being you in inflation and direct taxation in your county. So every time that you do this, you replace it. The ideology of remove the human, the hunter is bad, and the logger is bad, and the rancher is bad, ends up costing you out of your pocketbook. Literally, every citizen has to make up the difference for what those industries are putting in the system. When you fill a hotel with 300 people and they make income, that goes back into the system. When you cut timber, that went directly into the conservation. When a hunter buys tags to go hunt something, that money goes right back into the conservation for the animal they're hunting.
Okay.
When you pay taxpayer dollars to manage wolves, that goes directly from the government, which is taxed to you in one way or another, to pay for something that you get nothing out of. In fact, it's actually taking away opportunity for the hunter and hurting your food supply. Right. and your food security countrywide. So it's a disaster in every way possible that looks good to somebody, therefore they stand by it. And part of this is the fact that money is going somewhere. I think people need to really understand this. This money isn't just going out of the system and you're paying for it out of your taxes. Somebody is getting rich off of this system. Right now, the environmentalists and Wall Street are actually aligned. They have aligned themselves. That's why you wonder why all these 501c3 organizations and everybody has so much money. It's because ever since 2022, with the UN, the Kunming Montreal conference, they have aligned themselves because all the money now is flowing around every citizen. It's going directly from some humongous corporation to an agency. It's going around you. Take out the industries, guess who makes the money? It's somebody in Brussels or some corporation, some hedge fund from Wall Street. So you're not saving anything. You're not saving yourself. And if you think they care about your access on the land that you're protecting, if you think they care about you riding they'll never shut down my bike trail, or when what we're talking about, hand over control to these big companies, these massive worldwide global investment companies, and see how much they care about your access. Because that will be the first.
One thing I figured out several years ago was, and I've been working on getting it dealt with, but it's going to cost quite a bit to figure it out. There's a nonprofit in Bermuda. We've backtracked a lot of the money coming into CBD and all the other big groups. What they don't get through EJA, the Equal Access to Justice funds, there was $900 which was $800 to $900 million going out the back door of the interior to these environmental groups. Mm-hmm. That's the sue and settle deal is what they've been after for forever and making a lot of money off it. But a lot of the big organizations that are out there are bringing in money through a nonprofit in Bermuda. Well, we've been able to trace all that money going to Bermuda, or coming from Bermuda to all these groups. But we can't backtrack from Bermuda. We haven't been able to. So one of the things we're doing, and I've got a team of, I believe they're the best investigators in the world. They're former military. They had, that's the kind of jobs they had in the military and worked at the Pentagon and stuff like that. They're brilliant. And these guys can do things that nobody else can do. Like in the Great Pocatello Land Grab, our Emmy Award-winning documentary that we did, they were able to find in a month and a half what the FBI had been stonewalled on for a year and a half. So I want to, but it's going to cost me $500,000 to get these guys to go do all this stuff. I want to expose the environmental groups for where their money's coming from, because we know that the oil industry does take oil production. Who benefits if we're not producing oil here? Russia, Iran, those kind of groups, right? So same with any other type of who benefits if we're not developing lithium mines or using any of our critical infrastructure that our minerals that we need, and we're not producing that to do all of our chips, to do all the things that we need. China does. So there's a lot of money that flows through that nonprofit in Bermuda, so-called nonprofit, that goes to all of these groups, because there's a lot of money coming out of that nonprofit going to all of these groups. So we want to backtrack it and say, look, everybody, all you people that are complaining about oil production, or, you know, the things that we're doing here using our natural resource here, this is what's happening. This is why they're doing it. I want to be able to, we know it's happening, but we can't prove it yet. So, because we don't have the receipts for it, but I've got the right people that can go prove that and show the receipts. I just haven't been able to put the $500,000 together to go send them on the trail, because that's, you know, I'm not gonna stick them on a job that I can't pay for. So
well, and it's just these things are a lot of people. The people that you see that are always, you know, yelling about saving the planet and everything are, I view them now, with what I understand, as tools, because what they are is they're financial tools. If they can get them all stirred up and coming after these things to protect nature, when, you know, almost everything is follow the money. We understand this, right? Follow the money and control. Who is gaining the money and control from what you're doing? And it definitely is not the individual citizen. They are not gaining from this. They're losing. And they're being sold a lie that they're gaining from it, that this is helping nature, that this is helping them individually. And actually what it's doing is extracting every bit of their freedom and their resources out from underneath them. That's what's happening right now through all the stuff we're talking. The environmental groups just created a hole. They created a hole by suing and litigation and siphoning off millions to pay for themselves with our tax dollars through EJA, which created a hole that can now be filled by investment from out of the country in nature. And that's what we're, you know, when I say that, I'm talking about ecosystem services. I'm talking about carbon and biodiversity credit systems. And those are money flowing into our system, but they're not paying to save nature. They're buying nature. They're buying the future of any industry. They're buying and how they've done it is aligning with the environmental organizations. They've discovered that there's money to be made if they create these magical assets. They can align with the environmental organizations and then tie up this land for 100 years. And all land. We're not talking, you know, private land, public land, anywhere they can get their fingers on the contract for these things, they tie up that land, which limits our children and our grandchildren's ability to make anything that actually keeps the land alive and keeps our access. We lose our freedom and we're paying more, both. And then when you talk about wolves, it fires so many people up because they're like, well, wolves balance nature. Where are you hearing this from? This is an ideological fantasy world in your head that somebody has sold you from either college or a Disney movie or some media campaign, but you're not understanding that you are the tool in that situation. You are being used by somebody who has enormous resources for them to make the money, not you. You don't have access. You're not going to get the access. You're not going to have the freedom to use it. You're enabling them.
A useful tool. Yeah.
Useful tool.
No, I totally get that. And the going back to the funding on some of these groups also is, if you look at the groups that are trying to put big oil out of business or trying to stop them, and then you go look at the 990s or their 990s and you really dig into it, you see companies like ExxonMobil and people like that donating to the exact people in large sums to the exact people who are trying to put them out of business.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a shell game. They're trying to hedge their bets and say, okay, we're going to donate to you. So don't push too hard, or they're
exactly.
It's such
it's a paying off
backward
thing. Yep.
Yeah, it's such a backwards way to look at things. If everybody, it's just like on the wild horse issue or any of those issues. If everybody came together instead of being afraid of saying something that's real and that they know is a real situation and the right thing to do. If everybody would just come together and say it out loud, they can't cancel everybody. I mean, when I started in on politics, I had, I know a lot of billionaires from the horse industry. I know a lot of some of the richest people in the world or in the United States even, that are in the horse business. I know those people. And I went to them and I said, hey, get behind this. And they're like, well, we're not going to come out forward facing on this. And I said, well, if all of you did it, it would be great. Then nobody could, nobody would be causing a problem, or you can't cancel Nike and Walmart and all, the Mars family, all of them all together. You can't cancel all of that. So, but none of them would. It was funny because it was like everybody would just kind of stand behind me and they'd give me a little money to keep going, but they'd stand behind me and push me out there. And it's like, hey, you're doing a great job, but we're not going to poke our heads out, but you're doing a great job. Take all those arrows that are coming in and those bullets coming in. And that's, that's it. So
what you're describing is incredible, because we have a society in a free country. We wouldn't be having that particular conversation. Right. If we were actually free, but we are so afraid now, or people are so afraid to actually talk about the real issues and say, let's not argue about how many wolves need to be on the ground. Let's actually look at the real issue, which how do we create an economy that actually supports us and our food supply and our future, regardless of how many wolves are on the ground. But we start to have that conversation. Everybody panics, even on our side. They're like, well, we don't want to talk about that because, then we're going to get in trouble. It's like, no, I think we have to have the real conversation about how do we survive this as a country and keep people free who are actually on the ground doing the work. And that is working with our industries. Our industries are the ones that make life possible and freedom possible on the ground. It keeps sovereignty available. But we can't do it if we're all, we're too afraid to say anything and we're actually giving money to the other side.
Yeah. Exactly. And placating those people and trying to buy them off doesn't work. Never has. Well,
you bring up a good point there, because I hear a lot, like in the discussion of wolves, it's like, well, we can't, we have to come together and give them some, what they want. No, that never works. It's not. You think these people are going to be happy with you giving them a little bit? Their entire business is built on going further and taking more from you. That's how they make money. So there is no way if you ever give them anything, they're just going to take more or want more. There is no, let's compromise. We've been compromising for the last 40 years. And you know what that's called? That's called losing slowly.
Yeah, well, exactly. And my old boss, Forrest Lucas, it was very interesting because in 2011, he called me and I had no idea who I was talking to. I'm not a gearhead. I'm not, into racing or any of that stuff. So I had no idea who I was talking to. He told me he had, a ranch. I thought I was talking to a rancher because he said he had a ranch in Missouri with 6,500 mother cows. I thought, man, that's a big outfit no matter where you are. And so I talked to him for an hour and a half, and then I called a friend of mine, Mindy Patterson, who runs the cavalry group in Missouri. And I said, hey, this old guy called me and he was either drunk or a mumble talker. And I said, but he says he's got 6,500 mother cows. I said, that's a big outfit no matter where you're at. And she goes, well, what's his name? And I said, Forrest Lucas. She goes, holy crap, Forrest Lucas just called you? And she goes, you don't know who he is? And I said, no. And I called, and she said, well, just Google him. I'm not even going to tell you. So I Googled him and I'm like, holy crap. Well, he gave me his cell phone number So I called him right back, and he goes, Dave, you didn't get enough of me in the last hour and a half. And I said, Forrest, how come you didn't tell me who you are or who you were? And he goes, well, I gave you my name. I said, yeah, but you didn't tell me who you were. And he kind of chuckled. He goes, oh, I didn't think it was that big a deal. And I said, Forrest, you're a pretty big effing deal, you know? And I go, and he just kind of laughed. And me and him were like frickin' frack after that. I mean, we were together or on the phone every day for 8 years. And he was the first person. And the reason I'm telling you that story, he was the first person that came out that owned a company with a product that could have been canceled. And he was the first person to come out and have some stones and put his name on all the hard issues and try to push forward against the animal rights groups, against the environmental groups. And that's, you know, when he started Protect the Harvest and all that, he was not going to lay down, but he came up from nothing. He came up from living on a dirt floor in Missouri when he grew up. And so the guy was as common as they get, but he also understood the world and understood people have to fight for things that they need to fight for and what's right and wrong. Well, that was, you know, that he started, the founder of Home Depot, you know, all of those guys started that have come out, you know, and been vocal against a lot of that stuff, came after Forrest Lucas came out with a cancelable product. And Lucas Oil did nothing but grow from the time he came out. And so many people that scenario endeared them to him. And that's what I kept trying to tell everybody that I knew, all these big people. I was like, you know, this is people are gonna think you're great for doing this, not cancel you. So,
well, because the people on the ground that actually do the work that feel this, like we're working harder than we ever have, and it feels like a hamster wheel. You know, it feels like we can't get anywhere. We feel like we don't have anybody speaking up for us.
right.
So that's why if these people got came out with and stood against some of this stuff, we would have somebody that feels like it's protecting our values, our ethics, our what we're putting in, right? It feels like every time we're trying to do something, we're getting a bill for it instead of actually making anything. You know, we're the enemy of the the general public, which I don't actually think we are. I just think there's a lot of general public that have no idea what even happens out here. They don't understand the wolf is costing them.
When I have people in the ranching community calling me going, I had no idea this was going on with the wolves, or I had no idea this was going on with the wild horses, or, you know, they see little tidbits here and there, just like me prior to getting involved with the wolf deal. I knew it was out there. I knew it was a problem, but I didn't know how bad the problem was until I got into it. And, you know, that's where my tactical brain comes in, and I start being able to try to figure out a game plan to work on it. And it's so funny. You know what the worst part is? And I had a long conversation with a guy last night via text because he wouldn't call me. I've known this guy for 20 years, and he's big in the cattle industry. And he's kind of running blocker on me on some of this stuff. And I asked him, what did I do? What have I ever done to you but being good to you to get you to run blocker on me? And he lit into a whole litany of things that are not that I'd done to him, but, you know, the naysaying about what we're trying to do in the tactics and all of that stuff. And it's like, what else is going on? You know, what else for the ranchers, what else is going on right now that has gotten any further than having the Secretary of Ag tweet about a conversation, a Zoom call we had on a Saturday morning with her. She had a Zoom call with us to go over this and tweeted about the fact that she had a conversation with the president about it and it was going to move at Trump speed. You know, she said that. So I can say that out loud. I know more that I can't talk about, but that is out there in the public and forward facing. But, there's a lot going on right now that's going to hopefully change this scenario. And his question was, well, you're just going to basically, you're doing a documentary to go, say something, nothing's ever going to come of it. Or what's your game plan? And I said, well, for one, I'm not going to tell you the whole game plan because I can't have it out there. And he's aligned with some of the other groups that are, that are problems. So there's so much infighting, and generally every issue I get involved with, I have to argue and fight with my own people. The people that I'm trying to help them.
And so how I see this is what we're dealing with is when you centralize anything, you have a lot of people who are trying to figure out how to get their piece of the pie out of this. Mm-hmm. Right? So the hunters, there's a lot of hunter groups and the hunters themselves who think they're going to benefit from the takeover of nature by Wall Street through all these things that we're talking about, right? Oh, it's good for nature. They've been through college and told that the human is always the problem. And they think for some reason that we put all these ranchers out of business, they're going to just create more wilderness areas that they get to hunt through this process. And they flat out, if they think that, do not understand the way the system is written. So what happens is they end up fighting against us. We fight against each other over, oh, you hate wolves, instead of actually why I talk about wolves. What the actual goal is for the other side is to take over. Hunting is like a number one on their list to remove, not benefit them. So it's number one is the industries. So we don't have any money to actually support ourselves. We don't have any industry to actually have a voice, because those industries are the ones that protect. They supply the money to the communities that we live in, and they make our life actually through the tax system and the inflation. They make our lives actually easier, and they support the management of the forest, like we're talking about. But because they are not looking at that, they're just hearing this forward facing. They get their news from Instagram, and they go, oh, absolutely. They're literally fighting the very people who are the only ones standing up for their future. If you put that rancher out of business, not only do you make your food supply worse and make it more expensive, you also put yourself out of access of that forever, not just a little while, because you're going to now you're going to be dealing with a nature system that is owned by a hedge fund. And if you think the rancher is bad for blocking you from the elk, you're not even understanding why the elk are on there. But you think that's bad. You wait till a hedge fund owns the rights to that thing, and you think you're going to get access to it? Absolutely not. So the whole understanding is wrong. I believe that what we're doing, you and me, is actually offense. Now, and the money, the money system leaks into these other groups, and they think, I'm going to get my piece of this. So we got to just fly under the radar. We'll go along with what they're doing. And long term, that is like the worst idea in the world for the normal person. Yeah, you might get rich. What about us? What about the normal person that lives in the towns and the cities and that grows our food? Because obviously you're not thinking about them at all. Anything centralized just hands over control to somebody else, which never works out good for the normal person, right?
No.
So go on offense. We have to do what you're doing and what I'm doing. We have to create content and start speaking the truth, because there's people in the cities that actually will agree with us because they just haven't heard this.
Yeah. I mean, I'll go back to how I got started in politics. Was I was a horse trainer and had a great business. And when they shut down the horse slaughter plants in the United States, that ruined the horse industry for about 8 years. I mean, just totally flat ruined it. And the value of horses, and I mean, they were turning them loose all over, and the economic engine that they slowed down. And it's just like any pyramid. If you look at the top of the pyramid was the thoroughbred world, the horse show world, the rodeo world was the top 20% of the 10 million horses in the United States. And that 80% below went from owning an asset to a liability. So there was people who owned horses went from owning an asset to a liability. They went from owning something that was bare minimum was worth $1,000, $1,200. You know, if it was rideable, it was worth $1,000 to $1,200 no matter what. To that thing not being worth, nobody would even take it. You know, and that was probably the biggest hit the horse industry. And you go back to the gas line. I don't know how old you are. I'm old enough to remember the gas lines in the 70s, late 70s, all that, where Jimmy Carter had us in a major pickle with, you know, we had gas lines. There was problems with supply and all that. And you go back and look at the numbers and in the horse industry, and the slaughter never varied, and the horse industry never took a hit like it did when they shut the plants down. And then they blamed it on the economy in 2008, and you know, all of the crash, the housing crash and all that stuff. But the reality was I went from having, you know, as a horse trainer, $40,000 to $60,000 going through my account every month down to $5,000 a month going through my account. So that was a pretty tough hit, you know, business wise. And it made me go, wait a minute, I got to do something. That's when I thought, you know, I was going to do something about it. Well, it's the same kind of situation that we're getting ourselves into with either the wild horses or the wolves, the sea lions. You look at the sea lions. I mean, I call them the prairie dogs of the ocean, because they're the sea lions on the West Coast. I don't know if you know anything about that or not, but the sea lions on the West Coast, you used to drive the West Coast. I used to drive it all the time. And it was a cool anomaly to see a pod of sea lions, you know, or see a group of sea lions, small group, or see one somewhere. Now you can't go up the coastline and stop anywhere where there's a dock and not see a wad of sea lions sitting on a dock or sitting in the area. And in the Willamette, like in the Northwest, we've got all these jet sled companies, you know, the jet boat companies for Snake River, Columbia River, all the big rivers here, all these aluminum. There's probably 20 or 25 jet sled manufacturers in the Northwest. And those boats go from a cheap one, 60, 70,000, all the way up to $500,000. And these jet sled companies are going out of business too, because the sea lions, you can go out on the Willamette River or any of the rivers tributaries of the you know, Northwest, and you can go out there and the sea lions are so bad that you got to reel your fish in fast. Otherwise, it's going to be half ate by the time it gets to you by a sea lion. And they'll go out. There's pictures all over the internet of these things sitting in the Columbia or the Willamette River, and you'll get a 1,800-pound sea lion laying on your boat that's more, you know, anchored 100 yards offshore, 50 yards offshore, whatever, and he's up on your boat, sinking your boat because he gets up there to sun himself like it's a dock.
Wow.
Oh yeah, there's pictures all over. You'll have to go look at that. It's amazing. And I've been singing on that for 10, 12 years, trying to get politicians and, you know, folks to do something about that. And the tribes are finally doing it. And the British Columbia tribes, and they're a little more liberal about what they'll kill and what they won't kill up in Canada. And they kill things when they get out of hand. Well, the tribes up on the coastal tribes up in BC are now starting to kill them gut them out, and then they hang them, or they send the whole carcass to China. They're selling them to China because the Chinese want them. Well, why in the hell are, we got tribes here in Oregon that are on the river, and fishing tribes that should be in Washington that should be doing the same thing. And they're saying that because of the sea lions, the orcas are dying in the Puget Sound. They're not getting enough food. So, I mean, it's just one of those cycles. It's the same thing.
So what you're talking about, this is interesting. So at about the same time, this is kind of the root of this deal, right? It's this concept that we're going to save everything, which you can't do without destroying something else. So when there was a big push for the, saving the polar bear for a while, due to climate change, of course. And at that time, I had little kids, and one of my kids was watching a cartoon show. It wasn't Dora the Explorer, but it was her cousin or whatever that went around saving animals. So this is like a little kid's cartoon, and he is saving a seal from a polar bear. Now, this is the philosophy that goes through. We're trying to save the polar bear at the time worldwide, and a kid show is showing us saving a seal from the polar bear. You cannot save everything from something else without a disaster happening, because the seal is what the polar bear eats. So you save the seal, you kill the polar bear. You save the polar bear, you kill more seals. You're always going to have an effect, and you cannot look at something with Disney eyes and eyes from 1805. Everything was perfect and utopian in 1805. You cannot manage with that thought process, with that ideology, because it doesn't work. It is leaving reality on the table. And the more we fight over this, the more we lose. Not just us, but the people who are actually fighting against us on the ground are losing at the same time. They just don't even realize it. They're losing their right. They're losing their access. They're losing their ability to access public lands and private lands and utilize things. They're costing themselves more money, and they just have no idea where it's going. So that ideology is how they trigger people to stand on their side, and they don't even realize what they're fighting for. And I think that's where we have to come in. So let's tell people where your documentary is brand new. It just released 2 days ago on The Wolf, right?
Yeah, yesterday. And it's already up to probably close to 10,000 views now overnight, which is good for us.
But they can find that on
Western Justice. It's on YouTube, but it's on any of our Western Justice sites, whether it's our C3 is wjustice.org or westernjustice.info is our C4 site. That's our political site, but it's on both of those. It's on our Facebook. It's on all over everything. But on our YouTube channel is actually Western Justice C3 is the one that it's on. It's on our nonprofit, because we do all of our documentary stuff through our C3. So
it's easier to find it just going by westernjustice.com or .org, or you think?
Not .com. We have .org or .info.
Okay.
One or the other.
If you go on one of those, you can find the link to it. Yeah. And it's really dealing with what we're talking about here. I was just listening to Joe Rogan podcast with somebody the other day, and this ideology we're talking about, the very thing we're talking about, there is a misconception about the fact that the wolves are a benefit because of what happened in Yellowstone. This is the whole basis for their entire worldwide argument for why wolves balance nature is what happened in Yellowstone. At the time it was happening, when they put wolves in Yellowstone, I went down to Alabama for some reason. I was talking to somebody on the plane, and they were like, "Oh man, they're saving the willows in Montana, because of the wolf." And that's where this entire farce comes from, that they manage nature. So I just want to run over this very quickly, and you can look this stuff up. When wolves balanced nature in Yellowstone because humans were not able to manage that elk herd. They were in Yellowstone. Yellowstone National Park does not allow hunters to hunt the elk. So we weren't able to limit the elk numbers to a sustainable number. And you could argue it was sustainable, actually. I mean, they were overgrazing some stuff, but there was an elk herd there of 19,000 elk. And yes, there was more willows afterwards because the wolves killed the elk herd down from 19,000 to 4,000 something. So yes, if you lose 15,000 elk, it is going to have an effect. Now they use this as that's why even on the Joe Rogan podcast, like, yeah, but they've proven that we have to have some predators to balance out nature. No, we don't. Look at Colorado. You look at Colorado elk numbers. When they went up in elk numbers in Colorado, the Fish and Game Department just issued more cow permits and they went right back down to where they needed to. Humans are the perfect management tool for wildlife. And that's when we use grazing benefits to wildlife, hunters keep the numbers in order because all you have to do is adjust something. You know exactly how it's going to affect it. You have a hunting season that you can regulate the time of, how many permits you have. You know what humans are going to actually go out there and do. Wolves, you have absolutely zero control over. They are only an expense. They take from the wildlife bank all year round, and they don't stay in the area you put them. They take all ages and all sexes of the animal, so you have no way to tell if you can't tell them, oh, okay, you're done in this area. We need you to move over to area 452. That doesn't work. Right. Humans are far better, and humans put money back into the system, like we were just saying. Wolves only take it out. Predators cost us money. Hunters put it back in. Game animals put it back in. So you have to understand this. We have to think practically about what enables our freedom, what manages our wild places, and not this ideology thing that doesn't even apply. It's taught in our schools. I just got a scathing email, like with 1,500 word email from a professor who's telling me that, I'm all wrong because humans are always the enemy. Yeah. And somehow, nature balanced itself perfectly for eons before we screwed it up. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. We don't live.
Actually, nature never really balanced. I don't think it balanced itself for eons when you look back at all when things got too many, they had a huge die-off or things went extinct or things went away. I mean, it's like, I think humans are doing a better job of managing what's here. And like you said, I mean, I'm totally in concurrence with you on that. It's they do a much better job of regulating numbers than and why weren't they allowing humans to go into Yellowstone and get some elk? I mean, that's a human error right there.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with the wolves balanced something. It had to do with there was a problem because we restricted something. We restricted the tool that could have actually kept the elk at a level that they were sustainable at. And so they use that as the example. But then when you look over where the other place, they put wolves at the same time, which was in the Frank Church Wilderness in Idaho, same time as the Yellowstone. We don't talk about that. Why? Because there wasn't a problem with the elk over there.
Right.
We didn't have an overpopulation of elk over there, so they can't use that as the example. They have to use Yellowstone where we didn't hunt and where they kind of eliminated the beavers. So
Sean Shaw, the guy that's my John Walsh of he's the interviewer in our documentary. He's kind of the John Walsh of all my documentary stuff. But he's got a contract where he feeds elk outside of Jackson Hole up in the mountains.
Oh.
And they take draft horses in. They got sleighs that they feed big bales. They feed off of wagons when there's no snow. But he said the numbers were so far down, they were hardly feeding any elk up there this year. There was,
I've heard that. I need to talk to. I've heard that down there that they're the elk coming out of Yellowstone to the south are way down. I would like to
Yeah.
see it to get
Well, he
perspective.
said, I mean, he showed me pictures where they were feeding few years ago, they were feeding a couple thousand elk up there.
Right.
And now he said this year it was really different because they were feeding maybe 20. So
wow. That
it was way down. And I don't know what the numbers, I didn't really talk to him about it after the numbers, but his son, he didn't even go up there, but once he'd go in and pack some stuff into his kids because you got a snowmobile in or you have to ride a horse in or whatever. Because you can't drive back there. You can't get back there driving. I mean, they're in an area where he's got a picture of where their camp is, and they load up the sleigh with hay and they go out with these draft horses to go feed off this hay. And one draft horse actually stepped off the packed snow, and he was down here, you know, I mean, he was 4 feet below the other one, and they had to unhook him and walk him through the deep snow till he could climb out of it and get him hooked back up and then go feed. But he just went down. I got a picture. He sent me a picture of these two draft horses that are same size standing next to each other. One's down by the other one's feet. So yeah, it's pretty gnarly up there. It's not, I mean, that's a young man's game going up there and feeding, I guess, because it's.
Yeah, I'll bet. Well, and it just see that all the stuff we're talking about, it doesn't take a whole lot of common sense to look at this. Okay, you were feeding thousands of elk. Why? Yeah. Because there was more elk. So if it's not like this takes a brilliant mind to figure out. When you look at, they like to throw around these numbers like we got more elk now than we had before, you know, so there's no problem with the wolves, but they don't actually consider where those elk are. Like in Montana, all the high country stuff, if you look at the height of when the mule deer populations and the elk populations on our public land where the forests are, right, the height of it was 80s and 90s, which followed intensive logging projects, clear cutting, and heavy grazing on our public land, which is when all of our wildlife boomed in the mountains.
Sure.
So, and then it's declined in the mountains ever since then. We put in predators and we stopped managing our forests. So we stopped grazing, we stopped logging. Those things are not hard to figure out. You just line them up. And yeah, when we have, you know, the argument is, well, there's more now than there was. Yeah, they're all on the hayfields out in eastern Montana. That has boomed.
Well, that's exactly what they talk about up there on our documentary. Is the elk are all, you know, the Washington State Fish and Wildlife kid that was there, and he asked me not to use any of his stuff because he got in a pickle because he's in our trailer that we put out a while back, and he got in trouble for being in this, and had to, you know. And I said, listen, I'm not trying to get you fired. I don't have any reason to come after you or put you in a pickle. So, and he's a young guy that's from Alabama, and he's up in Washington State as a biologist. And I asked him point blank, I said, what are the whitetail numbers like? Oh, we still got a lot of whitetail, and their numbers are doing really good. Well, what's the mule deer? Well, the mule deer are fine. What about the elk? The elk are growing. The elk herd is growing, he said, and which is total bullshit. I mean,
it's not even.
All you got to do is go look at the high school football field and all these meadows. There's elk all over, so we know that there's more in the timber. And you know, one of the ranchers said, all the elk are down eating our hay on our hay ground, eating our alfalfa and eating everything that we grow to feed our cattle because the wolves have chased them out of the mountains. It's the only safe places in town. And you look at that picture in Sierraville where that picture on those people's front porch and their garage door is all bloody from a wolf coming into town and killing an elk on their front door or their front porch. I mean, it's just asinine. That's to me, that's where, you know, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife were able to come in and take care of some of those wolves. and justify being able to go into California. Newsom and his Fish and Wildlife director were pissed. I mean, they were flat mad about that. But they went in there and took care of some of those wolves because of the human health risk. The human health, if we can show the human health risk on these wolves coming into areas, then we have the ability to have the feds come in and do their job. So, and what they want to do, this administration at least wants to do something about this situation. They understand it, they're paying attention to it, and I think we're going to get some things accomplished. So,
well, and I think they actually understand basic economics to benefit the person on the ground, the actual person like you and me, not global corporations. We're talking about us. You have to benefit the rural people. The more you centralize something, the worse things are going to get. The more the control transfers to the global machine, the worse we have it on the ground. The more it costs us for everything: food, security, the things that we need to live, the supplies that we need, lumber, oil. Every one of those things costs us more the more we centralize anything. So when the wolves are driving us out of the mountains, driving the elk out of the mountains, they're putting more pressure on somebody else. They're putting pressure on your food supply and your pocketbook. If you want to understand this stuff, you have to really, I put out stuff all the time on this to show you why your money feels like it doesn't go as far. It's because it doesn't go as far. The money that was paying for the stuff you're paying for, you have literally put out of business. So because you've put it out of business through trying to save, buying the saving nature is all about removing humans, you now have to spend more out of your pocket for the same thing. And you're having less and less opportunities because they're being taken away from you. So
we're headed,
the way it is.
I'm doing all the logistics today and tomorrow because we're headed down to California Friday to start filming down there. The Siskiyous, they started turning. You know what's funny? The funniest thing is that even Western Livestock Journal put this out, and which bothered me a little bit. But the headline was, "Wolf populations grow in Washington State, and wolf depredations are down." And the funny part is
how does that work?
Nobody's been out on range this year yet. They're just starting to turn out on range this year. The fall, they pulled everything off. The fall of last year, they pulled everything off. So yeah, the wolf populations have gotten bigger since then because of all the new pups and everything, the new litters, everything. But everybody's just starting to turn out now. They're like up in Washington State, they don't turn out till the first part of May in those mountain meadows. There's nothing up there to eat until the grass hasn't come on. So they're just starting to turn out. And for somebody to go out and say something so stupid and lacking so much common sense or knowledge of how public lands grazing happens, or even the guys in California, that's all private land. I mean, there's very little public land in that area where they do grazing. California is almost all private land, but they're pushing these cattle. They're just starting to turn them out. Last week they turned them out. They have 5 depredations in the first 2 days. So don't tell me the depredations aren't going to skyrocket here through the summer. It's going to go nuts.
See, here's Dave. Here's how I think about it. Every really good lie is wrapped around a truth.
Yeah.
So when you take a truth like, yes, the wolves have increased and depredations are down, that is a truth. Then you wrap it in a lie, which is the perception that they are not having an effect on the livestock. Now, you forget to tell the actual truth, which is the cattle aren't even where the wolves are yet. Yeah. So you forget that part. But every good lie, to get somebody to swallow a good lie, you wrap it in a truth that makes it, oh, yeah, this has got to be the case. It's very nice. You just ask AI. Like, if you ask AI, how many elk a wolf eats every year, I got this answer: 0.7 to 1 elk per year that a wolf eats. Well, that isn't even enough to keep a wolf alive. So
Right.
that is so astronomically incorrect that you wouldn't. So this is what we're talking about. When you look at the actual studies, they're saying, these biologists are saying it's at least 18. Now I say 20 because I think it's from my experience, they kill more than they eat. So they're not counting those extra kills. But at least 20 elk-sized game animals a year in the areas like Minnesota, northern Minnesota and Wisconsin, they're killing way more because they're not elk-sized. They're deer.
Yeah,
so they
they're
kill
deer.
way more of those a year.
Yeah. It's amazing.
Well,
It's amazing
thank you so much, Dave, man. That's been quite a conversation. I'll let you get on with your day. We've kind of gone here for a while, but I appreciate you coming on and talking with us about this and some big issues. Yeah, really big. Just everybody keep watching for what we're going to get done and support our president and the administration on fixing this problem, because they're gonna work pretty hard at fixing it. All right. So that's good to hear. Talk to your senators, wherever you're at. Talk to your senators about making sure they're voting to delist the gray wolf. That's right. Because delisting the gray wolf, just so everybody understands, does not mean every one of them is going to die. No. For crying out loud. We have so many restrictions on them in Montana, and we can actually hunt the things here. We still get litigated, sued every week over something. So the first step is just to get them off the endangered species list so the states can actually start to try to do something with the wolf populations to put more money and opportunity in your pocket. Our whole tagline is, we don't have a wolf problem, we have a wolf management problem. So we got to manage them. They need to be managed. We're never going to manage them to extinction. There's no way that it would happen anyway, but I don't think we could ever do it. It's just like coyotes. Many coyotes as they get killed a year, there's still, 10 times what need to be out there. So, it's like we did that with wolves, but how did we do that? It wasn't it was because we poisoned everything. Yeah. So because some of those tools are off the table, there's no way to really duplicate that again. So they don't need protection. We have plenty of wolves around the world. We have way more wolves than you think. Wolves are all over the world. So, and they're starting to get on bike paths down in Oregon, Bend, Oregon. There's gray wolves traveling bike paths in Sun River, which is a high-end housing area. And I mean, it's going to get to that point where somebody's dog's going to get eaten off a leash right in front of them, or they're going to get attacked or whatever. And they say, they try to say wolves don't come after people. Well, tell that to the biologist that was up there counting fish in the river in the mountains of Washington and had to climb a tree and get pulled out by a helicopter because the wolves treat him in a tree, or her. It was a woman, treat her in the tree, and they had to come and get her. So the only way that we keep that from happening in our states is because we hunt them. Their behavior completely changed when we started hunting them. They're so hard to find now. So when they were getting brazen. I mean, they were like attacking horses tied to horse trailers of hunters, while the hunters were standing there, kind of a thing. They were going right up to people's porches trying to get their pets off but when you started a hunting season, it didn't take them long, about a year and a half, and they figured out that, it wasn't as safe anymore. Yeah. That keeps. Well, you talked to Justin Webb about his program, and it's, they're filling the hunting tags. Now the trapping tags are a little higher, but the hunting tags, they're filling less than 0.25% of the tags that are given out in Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, or that are bought. They're filling less than 0.25% of those by hunting. So that tells me that they're getting pretty elusive because they know that they want to stay away from humans. Yes, and they're incredibly intelligent. It's like a dog.
Right.
So they figure this out. They understand how to stay away from human activity. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not, but when you don't have them hunted, which is most of the United States, they get pretty darn brazen. I mean, they're right in
Yeah.
the cattle pastures in Colorado. They're right in the pasture with the guy that's calving, stealing their calves. I
Yeah.
mean, they don't even care because they know they're not going to get killed. So, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Well,
good talking to you. I'll
all right, my
hold on.
friend. Let's do it again sometime.